Hello, welcome, Marlon here. For today's cookie project, we're working on dinosaurs. As you can see here, we're working on 3 different designs, the Triceratops, Stegosaurus, and the T-Rex. We've got 3 different versions. I went from super easy to a more advanced project. Here you can see the completed kind of advanced cookies. The stencils that I designed are available in the description box, and these can be used also to make paint-a-cookies. And now onto the step-by-step tutorial. We're going to start with the more basic design and work our way up to the more kind of intricate airbrushed and royal icing versions. So if you want to skip ahead, please do so. If you enjoy my channel and you want to learn how to support what I do here, you can check out the description box. I thought we'd just quickly look at the cutters before we start. I got these on eBay, super affordable. You'll find the link in the description box. Here is the Stegosaurus. As you can see, really a nice imprint of the skeleton, T-Rex, and Triceratops, all of them very nice impression. And you don't have to use this. You can only use the cookie cutter if you want to kind of decorate with the skin on there, but the super easy way is by creating an imprint. So you're going to cut your cookie, leave the cutter in the dough, and then you come in here with this press, and then you press to get the imprint in the cookie dough. Now what's going to happen as you press, you can see here these bones, that's going to cause an expansion of the dough in there, and it's going to get tight against the cutter, so you might have a little bit of trouble getting it out of the cutter. But if you try to do the imprint and then fit the cutter on, it's much trickier. I think that the cutters are designed kind of like slightly angled to receive this, so just take note of that. And now let's get started. Here is my cookie dough. I rolled it out with my rolling guides to make sure that it's all the same thickness. That ensures that I'm going to get an even baking. If your cookies are thicker on one side and super thin on another, well, it's going to get burnt and then not cooked. So everything has to be the same thickness. And now I'm coming in with my cookie cutters. And when you're cutting your cookies, you want to try to keep everything as tight as possible to your last cut, so that you can maximize the amount of cuts that you do in one roll. Now I'm not touching my actual cookies, I'm just going around here cutting. I'm using a stencil to get my guidelines on, so it's crucial that I do not warp the shapes. So you leave the cookies on the parchment paper and you remove the excess dough. You do not touch the actual cookies that you anticipate decorating. You leave those there. Okay, so that's all I can fit. So I'm removing my excess dough. You see, I'm not touching the dinosaurs. They have to stay exactly in the correct position for the stencil to line up. So it's very important that they not warp. I'm just leaving them on the parchment paper. Now I'm going to put these in the freezer so that I can actually handle them. And now I'm going to demonstrate using the stamps, the imprints for the cookies. Let's get the outside lines on. So I'm just cutting my cookies, leaving the cutter in place. Okay, there. Everything stays right there. Now I'm taking some flour and dunking the impression in some flour. There's not much left on it. It's just to make sure that it, you know, it won't stick in there. And now I drop it in there, and you're going to press everywhere. Just to make sure that you get a good impression. I'm trying to lift this out. There he is. Now what happened when I pressed, it got really tight against the cutter. So that's going to be the tricky part, to get that off. So gentle, so that you don't lose the tail or something like that. Okay, just take your time. If you have trouble getting the cookie out, then do your impression and then cut. So here I'm pressing, making sure that I'm getting all my elements. That looks good. And then lifting off. Triceratops, let's try him. He's got a nice big foot, so it should go well for him. Okay. Okay, so there. These two are good. Let's try the T-Rex this way. Okay, after cutting a few cookies, I've come, there's a few little hiccups, so I'm just going to try to save you guys a bit of trouble. So first thing you're going to do, especially with the T-Rex, his feet are small, and so the dough is catching a bit. So first thing we're doing, we're not cutting the cookie yet. We're doing the impression. So what happens when you do this impression, there's an expansion, right? The dough needs somewhere to go, so it's pushing out and it's getting too tight against the cookie cutter, and then it's very hard to get it out of the feet. So first thing you want to do before now you cut is dunk your cookie cutter in flour to make sure that it's not going to stick. And now that I've got the impression, I'm using the mouth area and the feet to make sure I'm lined up well before I cut. So look right over to see, make sure that everything's in there. And then once you think you're good, you can press down to cut. And because of the flour, you see, the cookie is releasing very well. I was having trouble with that. Here are my cookies. They're chilled, ready to go in the oven. And here is some cocoa powder, and it's dry brush, and I'm just dusting the top of my cookies here just to give them a little bit more color. They're very pale, and so when I come in with my icing, it's not really going to stand out. So I'm adding the cocoa this way to make it look like they're kind of like dirty-ish, just like that. And you don't have to have it like everywhere, just in spots, just dust it on. Make sure the cookies are frozen, because if you come in with your brush on a room temperature cookie, you're just going to mess up your impression and the shape and all that. Cocoa powder is a nice way to get a bit of color on in a natural way, especially these are usually for children. I'm just going to shake off the excess. And there they are. Here's my royal icing, and I'm just adding the tiniest amount of cocoa powder in there just to make it not so white. I want it to have like kind of a off-whitish color. Okay, that's good. Just took out the brightness out of it. Now we're going to add this to our cookies. Here are the cookies. So you can see here they've baked very nicely. You can see the cocoa in certain areas gives them kind of like an aged, rustic look like you would find a fossil. Now they're perfectly fine just like this, but if you want to add some icing, I'm going to show you a super fast way to do that. Here I have a cooling rack with a paper towel underneath. It's just going to make the cleanup a bit easier. There are already so many videos on here showing how to fill these little crevices with a piping bag, so I'm not going to do that. It's a little redundant, so I'm just going to show you another way. You can either apply your icing with a paintbrush like this, just goop it on, and inevitably the icing is going to collect in the holes. So my icing is somewhat runny so that it'll kind of pool into the crevices, just like that. And the kids can help and participate. This technique is very kid friendly. You do lose the cocoa powder kind of effect there that we did, but you're still getting like the kind of dirty-ish look underneath. And now I'm just using my spatula here and removing the excess icing. As I drag off the top, what's left in the crevices stays, and I'm removing kind of like the higher part of the icing. And when it dries, it kind of caves in, this runny icing, and it's going to look even more like a fossil. So you can just clean up the edges, and that's it. Super easy. And the great thing about these is they do not need to be perfect, since they're old bones that have been dug up, right? And this is just a good amount of icing. So we're gonna let these dry, and then I'm just going to add a few little elements, but they're pretty much done. Here are the fossils on my cookie tray. I've got parchment paper underneath, and I'm just going to show you a little thing to maybe jazz them up. Now, you can see here I just brushed on the icing, and you still see the brown like cocoa underneath, but you know, they're a little bit more bonish looking on these. I still really like these. All depends if you don't want to have a lot of icing, if you don't have a lot of time, or if you're not really that familiar with piping. It is tricky. Now I'm just going to accent these to give them a little color. If you want to leave them like this, leave them like this. All I'm doing is adding like some grass here at the bottom. That's it. Okay. Nothing super high tech. And then I'm adding here a heavy amount. So it's important you work on parchment paper or wax paper. And I'm adding like a significant amount of icing, and it's going to drip off the whole bottom of the cookie like so. And then to that, I'm adding some chocolate rocks. And they're going to glue into the royal icing there at the bottom, adding a little detail to your scene, just like that. Okay, I'm just going to do that on all of them. So there, I like it. It's a super easy decoration. You know, sometimes it's not about not having the ability to do it, it's just not having the time to do it. We live such hectic lives, and your kids don't really, you know, I mean, it's their birthday. They want to feel like, you know, they're getting spoiled and all that. So this way you can make cookies quickly, and they're going to be happy and have something to show off to their friends. You see here, just be generous with the chocolate rocks. Make sure you're working on the parchment paper so that it releases well when they're dry. Here are the cookies once again before we move on with the royal icing version. Now for the stencils, obviously you can cut them any way you want. If you want to skip the dots or skip, you know, certain elements, then don't cut that portion of the stencil. And now on to the more kind of advanced tutorial. Here's my stencil, and if I tilt it in the light there, you can see it. So that's the outline of the whole design, and then here are some kind of shading and little detail bits if you want to airbrush. So I'm just going to pop that in the stencil. Even though the stencil is much bigger than my holder, it doesn't stop from like fitting. I can still use the holder. I'm just lining up my design and snapping it in. Doesn't matter that it's sticking out. So I'm still able to kind of like lift it off easily to shift it to my other cookies. And now I can just line it up. It's really just on the size. I should have maybe cut it a little bit smaller, but I'm going to make it work. So now I'm going to be able to airbrush my lines in one fell swoop. I'll have all my guidelines on there. And you can see why it's so important that your cookies not be handled and move when they're room temperature. Your stencil will not fit. If the tail is just a little bit off, it will not work. So I'm just quickly adding my guidelines, as you can see. Really the fastest way to get your guidelines on. There he is. Let's get going on the Triceratops. I'm going to start here with my purple icing and add my horns. I want them to be completely without a border, a perimeter line. I'm just playing with them until they heal. And then the actual horns over here, following the shape of the cutter. There. Again, getting them to heal so that we don't have a perimeter line. Just going to shake it. Okay, and now I'm going to actually flood the whole body. I'm going to add the details later, so these airbrush lines are all going to get hidden. It's more about just having foot placement and the toes and all that. We'll come in after and add the details with the other stencil. There. Now that's the foot that's on the other side, so we want to leave that. And now let's just fill everything in so that we don't get that perimeter. Okay. It needs a good shake. And once all this crusts over, I'm going to come in and add the head so that there's a slight separation between the two sections. Now that the body has had time to crust, I can come in here, add those toes. I'm working again in purple. That has got like kind of like elephant toes basically. And now over here I'm adding a little purple detail along his crown, around his head there. And and kind of like a beakish type thing up here. I'm going to leave it lumpy around the crown, but I'm going to heal it here so that it kind of like looks a little bit more rounded. And let's just fill in all here. There. So I know exactly where to pull my icing. I see the perimeter guidelines, so it's easy to know where to kind of nudge my icing to. Perfect. And a shake. So right here is the leg, like that's the fourth leg that's kind of hidden on the other side, the background. So I'm just adding a thin amount of icing here and just kind of like flattening it out, connecting it together. I want it to be as kind of flat as possible. I don't want it on the same level as the other icing. Ideally, I would have like added that with a stencil maybe earlier as like the first step. I don't know how it would look if I just colored it in with my marker. But anyway, it's fine. I'm adding it this way, and it's just like that little bit like lower in the back. Okay. All right, so I'm lining up the design and I'm grabbing some brown. It's called espresso. It's on the dark side, and I'm not doing all the lines. So I'm doing here these little accent lines around the head. Not doing like the outer perimeter. Okay, and now the smile. Let's just make sure it's lined up good. There. And that's pretty good. So I did get a little bit of the spray here that I didn't want, and under the mouth, but you're shifting the stencil sometimes when you've added the icing. It's not a perfect fit. Now I have my purple going, and I'm hitting the back of the Triceratops and creating kind of like, for lack of a, trying to think of what I could call this, like tiger stripes type thing coming down from the back in the accent purple color. Just like that. You see? Just to give a little bit of interest on the back, and I'm actually going to hit right at the crown onto the blue, fading that into the blue right there. And I'm trying to decide if I'm going to add the blue shading now or I'll wait when I have my legs on. I think I'll pipe the legs on now, and we'll come in and add the blue airbrushing after. So these two legs, I want them more kind of dimensional, and that's why I added that guideline, just to know where to pipe, finish the line. I'm leaving that brown kind of detail exposed. There. And this one here. I might just put the whole thing together and let's see. Yeah, that's actually better. And I just want these two little areas here. I'm just hitting, and that's it. You see? And then I might dust the rest in blue, but for right now, that's it. I'm just adding his like knee wrinkles and I'm putting my stencil down and just a light dusting of the espresso on there, you see? Just to give that little detail. I didn't get them nice on this one here. Let's see if I can get this one. There, that's better. You see? So I'm adding the knee wrinkles. This one here, they weren't that nicely done, so I'm just redoing here. Then I'm positioning, I have to kind of do them separately because they're not completely positioned like the stencil. So you just make it work. You see? There. I'm adding the wrinkles to like the knee area. Right here and right here. So that's that. I can't really see anything else that I'd want for there. I'm just now going to, I think, add a bit of blue shading to the overall design. And that'll be it. He or she, whatever, is done. So it's the same blue, and I'm just hitting like the eye area so that it's like more inside the mouth, under the head. Underneath the belly is always a bit darker. This back leg under the tail. And now let's hit like these legs here on the edge. On this leg here, the edge. There it is. So the same blue I'm hitting just all over to get it just a little bit more interesting around the leg area, under the belly. It's always darker under there. Obviously there's a shadow underneath. And it's just to give it a little bit more interest, you see? Now for the guidelines on the T-Rex. I'm just aligning that, snapping my stencil in. Let's see, the tail, the head, all good. And ready to go. There he is. Here's the T-Rex. I want to add some color to inside the mouth here. And I'm just going to use my marker. It's precise. I'm going to be able to go exactly where I want. I have my brown background, so when I color over the brown with the red, it creates kind of like a burgundy-ish color. So that's it, just like that. It's quick and easy, and I get some color in the mouth. Just gonna quickly talk about my little T-Rex here. So there's basically 3 layers of height, if you will. So the back leg, the leg that's furthest away, here and here, those are level 1. Then you have the actual body here and head, that'll be level 2. And then the arm and this leg here, this is level 3 to create like dimension. If you wanted, you could also have the head be on the same height level as the arm and leg here, but I think it could also work as a second layer of icing. So that's entirely up to you. I'm going to start with a really small amount of icing for level 1 here on this little arm right here. So you don't want to have it too pumped up this, since it's supposed to be background. And this leg here, same thing. I'm just going to get the icing to connect so it can level out, but I don't want a thick amount. I don't want this to be like pumped up, like a bubbly icing here. I'm trying to get it as flat as possible. And then a quick shake to level out. We're going to let this dry somewhat. I was trying to decide what color to make the stomach, and orange or yellow. I opted for the yellow since the Stegosaurus has the orange belly. It's up to you. I'm trying to limit how many colors I'm using here. Of course, you could mix up the rainbow, but it's not really practical, and personally I don't love it. I don't love it when there's 50 colors on a tray of cookies. I find it makes it a little bit too busy. If you look at any kind of professional graphic stuff, they limit the amount of colors that are used. Just because they're available doesn't mean that you should use them. Sometimes a little bit of less, sometimes less is more, as they say. So I'm adding my yellow, because yellow goes nicely with green. After all, it's one of the elements to creating green. There. I'm gonna shake it out. Okay, now I'm just going to fill this whole area, connect to that yellow edge. Filling the tail area. And now my head here. So the mouth, I'm leaving the teeth area. I'm going to add that after. There he is. Here is the T-Rex. I'm adding my lines. So just trying to line this up as best I can. I've got my espresso and I'm just hitting All right, let's see what this is looking like. All right, now I'll be able to come in and add my secondary bits, but pretty good. Next, for the T-Rex, some accent little elements. So I'm just resting my stencil on, aligning it. I'm holding it with my hand because it's not kind of holding right in the holder. And I've got green, a darker green, kind of like a leaf green, and I'm just airbrushing the scales on. There. Okay. And then I'm able to come in and add the second kind of layer of icing here to create like a bit of relief on this guy there. There. Shake it out. There. Okay, so that's pretty much it for right now. I can come in and add some green accent to this. So just gonna hit like around the character, right on the icing. This leg here is in back, so a little bit of shading. So I've got almost black icing, gray, and I'm adding the talons. I know exactly where to position because of my stencil lines. So I'm just quickly adding some tear shapes, touching the green and pulling from there. Okay, and now the teeth, super easy again because of those guidelines. I'm adding a dot here, touching the green and then pulling. So filling in that area and pulling. I decided to add one here, and then you can rotate there. Very nice. So I'm adding scales and knee wrinkles to the hind leg there. So I'm just hitting right here, right there. And then I was trying to do the elbow right here, but it's giving me problems, so I'm gonna skip it. Last design, the Stegosaurus. My stencil's not quite aligning right. The cookie is very, very just in there. Let's see if I can align it a bit better. Okay, I think that's good. There's the design. Here is the Stegosaurus. You can see the spikes. I'm stenciling them on because I want them to be really like laying flat on the surface of the cookie. I don't want them puffy like icing tends to be. And now I'm just aligning my stencil. Let me get my other cookies out of the way so they don't get damaged. It's upside down. So now I'm just aligning everything to be able to stencil just those elements. Okay, and now I'm using a spatula and thickish icing, and I'm just quickly adding these little details to my surface. And here, my coverage is not great over here. Okay. And now I'm airbrushing in orange right at the point. I just saw. I'm airbrushing in orange right at the points of my spikes here. Right here. Now, if your icing isn't super perfect, that's fine. This is supposed to be a dinosaur. They're not pretty, so it doesn't have to be perfect, okay? And now let's lift this off. And you see we have our nice spikes there. They look very rugged, so that's perfect. Next step, I'm adding the little details on the spikes. So just rest that on the icing. Wait for it to dry a bit so that you don't squish it. Line them up. And then I'm using the orange again. And you see, you get this nice little accent detail on those. Moving along. I'm going to start with the yellow here, and I'm adding the two spikes coming out the back here of the tail. Like so. And now the orange, I'm filling in the belly area, and that's where these stencils come in so handy. You see, you're basically like coloring in a coloring page. You know exactly where to put what. You can tweak the lines a little bit, but generally takes the guesswork out of decorating. There. My last orange area over here. All right. Now I'm going to grab my green and basically fill in the rest. I'm just going on the outside of my spikes like that and filling all this. I don't want a perimeter line. Let's smooth this section out. A little shake. And over here. And the last little bit is yellow. The beak here, I want it all to be like, look like it's one piece. There, and we're going to let them dry so that I can add the feet kind of like in the foreground. Let's shake it. There. Okay, and that's it for right now. I'm going to, maybe I'll do the feet now, just because, let's see, if I add, there's the back feet. So they're on the other side. I might add some shading to those to darken them since they're like underneath him. As you can see here, I stenciled the dots on his back, so you need to do those before you add the legs because the stencil won't lay flat. So that's an important part to remember. Here I've got the stencil holder on, and here are my guidelines for the design. I'm just trying to figure out how to get, he's just in the holder, and so it's a little tricky. Every time I snap in the stencil, it shifts a little bit. Let's see. Okay, that's pretty good. So all I'm airbrushing now, because I've already gotten all this, I just want to get a bit of the leg detail and all here. I'm working in, it's called cappuccino, espresso, it's called espresso. All right, and now I'm just airbrushing the little details that are at the bottom of the design. Just like that. Okay, let's see. So I'm getting, you know, the face detail and such. Now I want to stencil on the dots. So I'm just positioning the dots where I want them. Then we're going to lock the stencil in place like so. And if you airbrush these, well, they won't be yellow, they'll be kind of a darker or weird green. So we just add the icing to the holes here, and that's it. And there we have our little back detail. So I've got my cookie on my turntable here, and I'm just going to add my legs. I want to hide the base layer of icing and still leave a little bit of that initial outline on. Okay. There. Let's just get all the icing to connect to the perimeter. There. And the other leg. There he is. So I'm just going to let this dry before adding details to those legs. I'm just adding a little green shading on the legs there. Right like that. Okay. And then these two legs here, since they're kind of like further, shading them around the head. Maybe here on the tail. And then I'm grabbing my kind of espresso color and adding knee wrinkles to the legs. Oh, it's the wrong color. Gosh darn, it was blue. I couldn't even see. Thankfully, it's not a huge deal. There. There it is. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's cookie project. If so, be sure to share, like, and subscribe so that you don't miss any future uploads. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for supporting my channel, and I'll see you next time.